Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. The Tragedy of Julius Caesar. By William Shakespeare. Famous playwright William Shakespeare penned the tragedy of Julius Caesar in 1599. The play is based on historical events and is one of Shakespeare's most well-known tragedies. Julius Caesar's death in 44 BC is the subject of the play. Assassination plot, Caesar's dying battle and several of Shakespeare's most famous created phrases are contained in the play. After General Caesar's victory over Pompey at Munda, Roman citizens gather in the street to celebrate. Residents of Rome are told to get back to their jobs by two senators, Flavius and Marellus, as they make their way through the streets of the city. Cobbler Marellus begins conversing with him, mistaking the cobbler's sarcastic answers for seriousness. Flavius interrupts Marellus as he becomes enraged with the cobbler and inquires as to why the latter is not working. In order to enjoy the festivities, the cobbler informs him that he will be taking a day off to see the parade and the procession of Caesar through the city. Marellus chastises the cobbler for his erroneous reasoning and asks him what genuine value Caesar's triumph has, implying that it does not add to Rome's great glory because it did not include the conquest of a foreign opponent. When Pompey triumphed, the residents of Pompeii rejoiced, and now they rejoice in its defeat. Marellus chastises and expels the rebellious populace. As soon as Flavius and Marellus are alone, Flavius orders Marellus to go to Capitol Hill and remove any crowns that the public have put atop Caesar's statues. He is adamant that they can manage Caesar's public image if they can control public opinion of Caesar. The next scene has Caesar, his generals, Calpurnia, and a soothsayer entering a public square. "Beware of the Ides of March," warns the soothsayer. As Caesar says, "He is a dreamer, let us leave him pass," the guy is dismissed. Brutus and Cassius, two of Caesar's generals, are the only ones who notice the man. There has been a noticeable change in the demeanor of Brutus in recent days, and he tells Cassius that he has thrown the trouble of my countenance solely upon myself. For the sake of better self-understanding, Cassius offers to act as Brutus' mirror, showing him how well liked and respected he is among the citizens of the city. It's a worry for Brutus that the people desire Caesar as their ruler. In spite of his affection for Caesar, he claims that he does not view Caesar as a superior being. Cassius agrees and recalls two instances in which he had to save Caesar from drowning in a seizure. According to Brutus, it's unlikely that someone with such a frail constitution could hold the office of monarch. While the men are chatting, Caesar and his entourage arrive. It is Caesar's opinion that Cassius appears to be a guy who thinks too much when he sees him. Antony encourages Caesar not to be afraid of him, but he tells Caesar that he wants to avoid Cassius. To find out what transpired while they were away from Caesar's funeral procession, Brutus and Cassius take the general Casca to task. On 3 occasions Antony made an offer to Caesar for a coronet. On all 3 occasions, Caesar turned it down. He further claims that he was thrown to the ground in a fit when the crowd cheered for Caesar. If Caesar is sick, Brutus wonders aloud. Before he collapsed, Caesar was jovial and the throng proclaimed their affection for him, Casca says. His power was not diminished by his downfall. Even if Caesar had stabbed their mothers, the crowd would still have cheered, according to Casca. Casca tells Cassius that Cicero talked, but that he couldn't understand him because it was Greek to me when Cassius inquires. Prior to leaving, Casca mentions that Flavius and Marellus were cast to silence, fired, for removing scarves and tokens from the statue of Caesar, which they did. Cassius is left to fend for himself after Brutus departs. Cassius states to himself that he expects to seduce Brutus away from his noble nature in his inner monologue. By forging Roman people statements of support for Brutus and their dread of Caesar's rise to power, Cassius intends to bring Brutus' house down with him. Later, in a Roman street, Casca and Cicero have a conversation. As Casca puts it, he has seen a lot of bizarre things lately that he believes are omens of impending doom, such terrible weather and a lion walking around the capital without showing any signs of discomfort. Cicero reassures him, saying that men will interpret events as they see fit. He inquires as to whether or not Caesar will be in town tomorrow. Casca says he will, and he's not lying about it. This confused sky is not to stroll in, Cicero tells Casca as he departs. Cassius will soon appear. Casca questions his decision to go for a walk in the middle of a storm. Cassius believes that gods are using the storm to demonstrate Caesar's inadequacy in power and how unworthy he is to rule. That day, the senators intend to make Caesar king, and Casca tells Cassius about it. With his sword drawn, Cassius vows to the gods that they can give him the ability to defeat Caesar, if only they can make him king. He slams Rome for allowing such a thing as Caesar to rule. At this point in the story, Cassius takes advantage of Casca's agreement to tell him about the high-ranking Romans he has convinced to join the uprising. Insisting on the truth of this claim, one of Cinna's henchmen enters. Following his introduction, Cassius shares his talk with Brutus earlier in the day with the other two men. So that Cinna can place them in Brutus' Senate chair, as well as on his statue and in his house, Cassius hands over the counterfeit letters to Cinna. Casca is informed by Cassius that 3 parts of Brutus are already theirs, and Cinna leaves. It is Casca's belief that the inclusion of Brutus in the plan will assist persuade more Romans to join the cause. Brutus is seen pacing in his orchard in the second act. Knowing that Caesar must die, he has an internal debate with himself over the king. However, even though he has never seen Caesar enraged by his power in the past, he recognizes that there is no way to wield such power without abusing it. Brutus' manservant, Lucius, enters the house carrying a letter he found near a window. The letter accuses Brutus of dozing through the threat to Rome. He interprets the letter as an attempt to bring Caesar down on behalf of the entire Roman people, which is exactly what he thinks it is. There are some visitors in town, and they are none other than Cassius and his henchmen. A few words regarding joining the group are exchanged between Cassius and Brutus at their introduction. The assassination plot against Caesar was then seriously discussed by the conspirators. Brutus expresses his willingness to kill Caesar's spirit rather than the man himself, saying that he would prefer it. Boldly but not wrathfully kill him, Jesus instructs them, so that they may be sacrificers, not slaughterers. Brutus, on the other hand, is adamant about not killing Antony as well. Determined to make it to the capital, one of the men, Decius, tells the others that they can ignore soothsayers and augurs and get there on their own. Brutus advises that the men pretend to be Roman performers in order to mislead everyone about their true intentions while they disperse. Brutus' wife Portia enters after the men have left and questions her husband about why he has been acting strangely. This has made him feel unwell, he says. Because of her position as his wife, she wonders why he won't tell her what's actually wrong. He just comments that he wishes he had earned such a noble wife. Brutus sends Portia out the door when he hears a knock at the door. Ligarius and Lucius make their entrance. When Brutus asks Ligarius whether or not he is unwell, the latter replies that Ligarius would be okay if Brutus had some sort of honorable deed on him. To which Ligarius is promptly escorted from the stage by Brutus. After Caesar's wife's nightmares keep him awake at night, he wanders around the home dressed in a nightgown. He was murdered, and she's been yelling about it 3 times now. When the priests present a sacrifice and report back, he has one of his servants do so on his behalf. Upon entering the house, Calpurnia informs Caesar that she has had enough terrible indications about Caesar's future to suggest he stay at home and away from the capital. Caesar declines, claiming that it is futile to attempt to alter the will of the all-powerful gods themselves. While they are still arguing, the servant returns and informs him that the priests have recommended he stay at home instead. He resists, though, insisting that he would not succumb to his fears. At last, Calpurnia begs Caesar to send Antony to the Senate in his stead, and Caesar complies out of kindness for the woman. In order to bring Caesar to the Senate, Decius enters. Tells him he is not going and that he should tell the Senate that he's staying at home since he's decided to. A dream Caesar's wife had in which she saw his statue gushing blood and a crowd of Romans smiling around it has been related to him by Decius. Romans will gain strength from Caesar's blood, according to Decius, who claims her dream was misunderstood. Moreover, he claims that the Senate has voted to award Caesar a crown on that day, but that they may not if he stays at home that day. In the end, Caesar agrees to leave. In the next scene, Artemidorus, a man who has written a letter to Caesar informing him about the conspiracy, appears. He's waiting for Caesar to pass by on his way to the Senate, and he's going to give him the letter. Portia, not far away, sent Brutus' servant to the Senate to bring Caesar's whereabouts to light. Portia asks the soothsayer if Caesar has arrived at the capital yet. He verifies that he hasn't, but he still wants to speak with him, so he's going to wait along Caesar's path to the capital in the hopes of running into him. They approach Caesar as he passes by on the street in the 3rd act of the play. Caesar dismisses Artemidorus after he brings him his letter. One of the conspirators tries to eject Antony from the chamber as Caesar and his generals enter. The brother of a Roman exile, Metellus, goes to Caesar to ask for permission for his brother to return. There is no justification for Caesar to remove the banishment, he says. But Caesar remains unmoved, and Brutus and Cassius kneel before him and repeat Metellus' plea. To try to change his mind, he tells them, they'd be better off lifting up Olympus. All of the conspirators kneel at Caesar's feet in front of Caesar. A few seconds after Casca, the other men follow suit and stab Caesar. Finally, Brutus does so. Et tu, Brute? Then fall, Caesar, are Caesar's final words before he dies. The conspirators hail the victory of liberty and declare that tyranny is dead in the midst of the pandemonium that ensues. Antony is one of the several people who flees the room. After bathing their hands in Caesar's blood, the conspirators are urged to espouse the virtues of peace and liberty in the marketplace. As the first to agree, Cassius says the scenario will be reenacted throughout history as a reminder. The servant of Antony arrives with a message for the king. He claims that despite Antony's passion for Caesar, he is willing to swear allegiance to Brutus if the latter agrees not to punish him in the same way that Brutus did to Caesar. When Brutus agrees, he's shortly joined by Antony, who addresses the men directly. Convinced that there is no finer place to die than by Caesar's side, he urges the conspirators to assassinate him immediately. Brutus reassures him that they feel sorry for him and the Roman people. "I don't dispute your wisdom," says Antony. He shakes the bleeding hands of the men who helped him. Cassius worries Antony's commitment to their cause, but Antony assures him that he wants to remain their ally and that he is confident that they will give him fair explanations for their decisions. For the funeral of Caesar, Antony inquired if he might bring Caesar's corpse to Rome's Forum. Cassius initially opposes the plan, but Brutus convinces him that it will help him win over the people by making him appear more empathetic. Antony is left alone with Caesar's corpse after the assassins have fled. He begs Caesar's pardon for his gentleness and meekness towards his assassins. A curse would fall on all of Italy because of Caesar's death, he claims, for he was the noblest man who has ever lived. Cry havoc. And let loose the dogs of war is the famous line used by Antony to avenge Caesar's death. Antony instructs the servant to return to Caesar's adopted son, Octavius, and to keep him out of the city. He warns him that now that Caesar is dead, the boy's life is in jeopardy. To better understand the public's reaction and determine the best course of action, he invites his servant to hear his eulogy at his own funeral service. Brutus addresses a large gathering in the Forum in the next scene. He claims he didn't kill Caesar because he didn't care about the guy, but rather because he cared more about Rome than he did about Caesar. He tells the citizens that if Caesar had ruled, they would have been slaves. No offense was taken by the crowd, and he inquires as to whether or not they have been offended. With Caesar's corpse in tow, Antony arrives. Antony, despite his lack of involvement in the plot, has become a citizen of the Commonwealth. His benevolence is applauded by the crowd. By claiming that he is not there to praise Caesar but rather to undermine him, Antony begins his address. He concedes that Brutus is correct that Caesar is unduly ambitious, but then reminds the crowd of the day when Caesar was offered the coronet 3 times and denied it. They should all mourn for Caesar, he argues, because he cared about the poor. In response to Antony's remarks, the audience bursts into tears. They implore him to recite them Caesar's will, which he does. Antony responds that Caesar's devotion for them would be too overwhelming for them to handle. When Antony realizes that he has gone on for much too long, he begins to worry that he has offended the brave soldiers who stabbed Caesar. The mob becomes increasingly agitated, demanding that he read the will and yelling that the conspirators were traitors and murderers of the president's family. Seeing Caesar's body and the severe stab wounds that cover it, Antony gives in. As he says, he is not attempting to incite a revolt among the crew. They proclaim that they will revolt and burn Brutus's house down. Antony warns them to hold off because he hasn't had time to review the estate documents yet. Every Roman citizen was left a sum of 75 drachmas in Caesar's testament. In addition, he stipulated in his will that his private gardens and orchards be open to all Romans and their heirs, who might come and go as they pleased. Because of this, the crowd vows to avenge the death of Caesar. They create a horde and set off on a rampage through the city. When Antony is left to his own devices, he ponders the mayhem he has just unleashed on the city of Rome. The servant of Octavius returns to inform Antony that his master has arrived in Rome. That's what Antony claims he'll do. Noted by the servant are the expulsions of Brutus, and Cassius Cinna, a poet who lives nearby, is walking down the street. The mob demands to know his name, and he reveals it. As they swarm, they mistake him for Cinna the conspirator and beat him to death. He meets Octavius and Lepidus in his residence in Act 4. They discuss who will be put to death, looking over a list of names of those who betrayed Caesar. Lepidus agrees to Publius's death, as does Antony for his own nephew. Lepidus has left and Antony has asked Octavius if Lepidus is deserving of membership in their senate. Octavius concurs, but Antony isn't convinced. At the end of Antony's speech, the senators mention that they are levying powers to raise an army. Brutus' camp receives a communication from Cassius that he is no longer happy with him. Cassius appears and accuses Brutus of wrongdoing. Even though Brutus says he has not, Cassius agrees to meet with him in his tent so they may talk privately. Even though he'd sent a letter to Brutus begging him not to, Cassius claims that Brutus has sentenced one of their men for accepting bribery nevertheless. While Cassius admits to taking bribes, Brutus brings up the death of Caesar and wonders if they should allow themselves to descend into the same level of corruption that they were seeking to eradicate by killing Caesar. He is furious and tells him to watch out for his health and not to push Brutus any further. When Cassius pulls out his blade and tells Brutus to stab him like Caesar, the two men continue to battle. When Brutus finally gives in, he orders Cassius to put the dagger away, and the two men embrace and forgive. They all sit down to share a glass of wine. Brutus reveals that he has been struggling emotionally since the death of his wife. Messages from Rome arrive by messengers who make their way into the room. Octavius, Antony, and Lepidus' new administration has executed hundreds of senators. They should march to Philippi to meet the opposing army, as suggested by Brutus. Cassius says he'd rather the enemy find them and waste their resources than the other way around. Brutus and Cassius both agree that they should march. Brutus is left alone in his tent as the others leave for the night. When Brutus wakes up, he is visited by the spirit of Caesar, who tells him that they will meet again in Philippi. In the last scene, Octavius and Antony prepare to face their foes on the Philippi battlefield. When Cassius and Brutus' troops arrive, the two commanders meet and trade insults. On hearing the news of his father's death, Octavius vowed vengeance, and the two armies set off for combat. Octavius and Antony leave, and once they go, Cassius instructs a soldier to inform him that he has recently observed some ominous omens. His future is uncertain, and he tells Brutus so. The men have come to an agreement that they would prefer to die in battle than be captured and taken to Rome where they would be put to death. The battle begins, and Octavius' army is quickly routed by his own troops. Settling in and torching Cassius' camp. To find out who is in charge of the incoming army, Cassius dispatches Titnius as his second-in-command. Seeing that he would be defeated, Cassius hands a soldier his sword and asks him to murder him so that he can avoid being arrested. In his final words, he talks about how the sword that murdered him will be used to exact vengeance on Caesar. Then Titnius comes back. When he sees the death of Cassius, he quickly concludes that Cassius must have mistakenly seen him hug the leader of the opposing army, Brutus, and assumed that he had been captured. Titnius commits suicide while he cries over Cassius' corpse. As soon as Brutus hears the news of Caesar's death, he rushes to his friend's grave and curses it. With his troops still on the field, Brutus begs them to hold his sword so that he might rush into it and kill himself. It is time for him to die, he tells them, for Caesar's spirit has appeared to him. However, despite their pleas for him to depart, his men insist that he stay. As a final act of respect, he instructs one of his soldiers to remain in the rear and hold his sword so that he may be impaled. Brutus announces as he dies, "Caesar, you must now remain calm. I did not murder thee with half as much ferocity as I had hoped as a matter of fact." They find Brutus' corpse as they enter with their troops. By taking in Brutus's troops, Octavius proclaims that Brutus is the greatest Roman of all time since he assassinated Caesar only because he thought it was in the best interests of the Roman people. Meanwhile, the rest of the soldiers head out to celebrate their triumph with Octavius. Julius Caesar, despite being the play's title character, has a paltry amount of screen time. The character only appears in a few scenes before he is killed off in the third act. His death, on the other hand, serves as the catalyst for the rest of the plot. At any cost, Caesar is an opportunist who craves power so much that he'll do whatever it takes to get it. Death comes as the result of him defying his own superstition by traveling to the Senate for the crowning. In the play's conclusion, his son assumes the throne, ensuring his enduring legacy. Antony, he's a good orator and a better conspirator than any of the men who killed Caesar. This helps him win the fight because of his improvisational character, which helps him convince the Romans to take revenge for Caesar's death. Even after Caesar's death, it's clear that he has Caesar's best interests at heart and that he cares for him. Brutus is a difficult character to pin down. In the beginning, he looks to be the antagonist, but by the conclusion, he is nearly heroic in his unwillingness to be kidnapped and killed. In the play, he seems to be closer to Cassius than anybody else. As a sacrificial act for Rome's greater benefit, Brutus murders Caesar. Even though he believes that Caesar is unfit to be king and that his execution would be the wisest course of action, He makes it clear that he has no plans to seek the throne after Caesar's death, hinting at his true nature. Octavius, despite being adopted, possesses many of his father's traits, including stubbornness, arrogance, and a refusal to concede ground. Even though his character isn't introduced until nearly the end of the play, he makes a strong first impression as someone determined to exact revenge on those responsible for his father's death and then ascend to the kingdom. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.